Hello and welcome to another episode of the Catechism Guy Podcast. My name is Taylor, and this is the show where we open up this big, heavy book called the Catechism and learn what the Catholic Church actually teaches. In today's episode, we're talking about a really important topic, one that I think affects many people, especially Catholics today, and that is the topic of natural family planning. If you're not sure what natural family planning is, don't worry. With my guest on this episode, we really break open what exactly it is. We break down some myths that are out there about it, and we even talk about contraception. So if you don't know what natural family planning is, it's an alternative to contraceptive methods to plan and to regulate births in family life. And so you're going to learn a lot in this episode, and I want to get right to it, but we actually don't ever quote the Catechism directly in the episode. So I want to point just your attention to where it is in the Catechism the Church actually teaches about this topic. And so this is in the section on morality. The paragraphs that I encourage you to look at are starting at about 2360, going until about 2378, I believe. The part that speaks directly to natural family planning is in the section on the fecundity of marriage, which is the fertility of marriage. And we hear in this section on how fertility is a gift given to married couples as a part and end of marriage. And so I want to read this part just really briefly to you, and then I'll get right to my conversation with my wonderful guest. So again, this is in 2366. It says this: fecundity is a gift, an end of marriage. For conjugal love naturally tends to be fruitful. A child does not come from outside as something added on to the mutual love of the spouses, but springs from the very heart of that mutual giving, as its fruit and fulfillment. So the Church, which is on the side of life, teaches that it is necessary that each and every marriage act remain ordered per se to the procreation of human life. This particular doctrine, expounded on numerous occasions by the Magisterium, is based on the inseparable connection established by God, which man on his own initiative may not break, between the unitive significance and the procreative significance, which are both inherent to the marriage act. And then it goes on a little bit further down that it says a particular aspect of this responsibility concerns the regulation of procreation. For just reasons, spouses may wish to space the births of their children. It is their duty to make certain that their desire is not motivated by selfishness, but is in conformity with the generosity appropriate to responsible parenthood. Moreover, they should conform their behavior to the objective criteria of morality. When it is a question of harmonizing married love with the responsible transmission of life, the morality of the behavior does not depend on sincere intention and evaluation of motives alone, but it must be determined by objective criteria. Criteria drawn from the nature of the person and his acts, criteria that respect the total meaning of mutual self-giving and human procreation in the context of true love. This is possible only if the virtue of married chastity is practiced with sincerity of heart. And then speaking about natural family planning, it says that periodic continence, that is, the methods of birth regulation based on self-observation and the use of infertile periods, is in conformity with the objective criteria of morality. These methods respect the bodies of the spouses, encourage tenderness between them, and favor the education of an authentic freedom. In contrast, every action which, whether in anticipation of the conjugal act, or in its accomplishment, or in the development of its natural consequences, proposes, whether as an end or as a means to render procreation impossible, is intrinsically evil. Okay, so there's a lot there, and I could probably do an entire episode just breaking open these paragraphs. But in this episode with my guests, we're going to break open what natural family planning is. And what I wanted to read this here from the Catechism for you is so that you can see that the Church is very clear and telling us that it is not okay for us to use contraceptive means in order to space the births in our family. And it is a good and just thing to be responsible in parenthood, of course, but the Church here is saying that it is not enough to have good intentions, but rather the means in which we accomplish those intentions of being responsible in the begetting of life, those means of doing that must be moral themselves, right? It can't be that the end justifies the means here. And so that is why the church says natural family planning. Like, that is something that can be used in regards to this responsible way of a family life and of begetting children and of spacing children in our families when it is needed and when it is just. So with that being said, I think you're going to enjoy my episode with this guest. She really knows what she's talking about. She herself actually teaches natural family planning and walks with couples who are learning this and trying to live it out in their own family and own marriage. So I hope you enjoy it. Please share in the comment section if you're watching this on YouTube what you think about natural family planning and in regards to contraception. Do you think that there is a significant difference here? Do you see a good reason in your own life to use natural family planning, or what is your thoughts? I would love to hear what you think about that in the comment section. So without further ado, here we go. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Catechism Guy Podcast. I'm here with an amazing guest. Her name is Melissa. She is Catholic. She is a wife and a new mother, which is extremely exciting. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a fertility care practitioner, a soul core leader, a cheese enthusiast, an adrenaline junkie, a world traveler, professional scuba diver. The list goes on. She's trying to keep her plants alive and her life simple. And lastly, she hosts a YouTube channel where she makes videos about faith, family, and mental health. There's a lot of things on that list, Melissa, but first and foremost, thank you for coming on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Wow, you pulled some stuff that you found on me, and it is all true, and definitely about the cheese. I'm a big cheese enthusiast, and I'm happy to be here. So thank you for having me on your podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's great to have you. I'm so excited to talk about our topic today. So for those of you listening or watching, we're going to discuss natural family planning and kind of talk about that in comparison to contraception. So I think probably the best way to start our conversation is to define terms. And Melissa here is the expert. So we're going to have her do that for us. So first and foremost, Melissa, what would you say is natural family planning? How would you define that? And we'll just start with that. Let's start with what's natural family planning, what's contraception, maybe just to define our terms before we get started.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
So NFP, or natural family planning, I'll refer to it as NFP because it is simpler. So NFP is an umbrella term. It's an overarching idea, and then there are different methods and modalities within that umbrella term. So basically, it's a way for a couple to look at a woman's cycle and the day-to-day changes in her fertility from one day to another, looking at the natural biomarkers, biological markers of fertility that she has from one day to the next. And then it can be used for natural family planning. So using those biomarkers, the couple can together decide to avoid pregnancy or achieve pregnancy based on that information. So just to touch really quick, a few of those different methods that would be under that umbrella would be someone taking their temperature. So basal body temperature is one of those biological markers. Another one is checking hormone levels. Another one is checking cervical mucus. There's ways to check the position of the cervix. And there's also a combination of all of those. So on any given day, a woman and a couple can be confident about whether she is fertile or infertile, and then make decisions accordingly based on whether they want to become pregnant or avoid becoming pregnant at that time.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a great explanation. So I guess the next question then is, why would someone want to do this? Of course, mainstream, we know that there's other ways of preventing pregnancy. Like we have the pill, IUDs, all these different forms of contraception most people are aware of. So why would somebody want to practice natural family planning, NFP, one of these methods, instead of one of these other contraceptive methods?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why someone might choose to practice NFP. The biggest thing to me is that it helps a couple, and especially a woman, but also the man, to learn so much about their reproductive health and to really become in tune with their body so they can accurately avoid or achieve pregnancy. And of course, there are other ways to do that, but this is completely natural. So there's no artificial hormones involved. There's nothing artificial about it. It's completely natural and it's cooperative with the woman's body. It also upholds the dignity of both the man and the woman and their marriage. And a lot of times, even single women will use NFP not so much for the family planning aspects of it, but charting the cycle so that they can address reproductive health issues. A lot of women struggle with cycle issues, painful periods, really bad PMS, hormonal issues, all kinds of things that they may just accept as normal, or they may choose to take birth control as kind of a way to manage those symptoms and may not know of other options. And we can talk about birth control more later on, but this is a way for them to really understand what's going on with their body and address their health, and actually treat their health and treat what's going on. So it's really beautiful. And there's so many reasons why a couple might choose to use it, or a woman individually.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. And almost I feel like, and no harm or foul to the term or the phrase natural family planning, but it's almost not a very good label, all right? You know?
That's true. Yeah, that's really true. And so I teach specifically the Creighton method, which is one model of natural family planning. And I use NFP frequently because that's what more people are familiar with.
Sure.
But we do try to steer away from that and talk more about fertility awareness methods. Because it's much more accurate and more inclusive of all the ways that it can be used, because it can definitely be used more than just for family planning purposes, although it is true that it's a natural family planning method, but there's more to it than that.
Sure. And maybe, of course, we can dive into some of these different specifics in just a bit. But first, it'd be great to hear a little bit about how NFP has become such a big part of your life. So how is NFP a part of your story, and why are you so passionate about it?
Yeah, so I always try to remember exactly where I first came across it. And I don't remember the beginning, but sometime during grad school, I remember encountering NFP just because of the community that I was a part of that was so beautiful and so alive. And there was a lot of married couples that were young and using NFP. I had a friend who was teaching the Creighton model at the school that I was going to for grad school. It was a big medical school, and in the medical school, they had a pro-life group for the medical students, and they had some NFP teachers come and give a talk, and I somehow found out about it and attended it and found it so fascinating. So from the beginning of learning about it, all of it just made sense to me, because it was all about understanding the way that the human body works, and then working with the way that the body works instead of working against the way that the body works. So it was fascinating to me. I loved learning about it. I couldn't wait I hadn't met my husband yet at that point, and I just was like, I just want to learn it because it's so amazing, and I couldn't wait to learn it. And then when my husband and I got engaged, we began taking classes together and learning Creighton. And Creighton was just a natural choice for us because that was what all of our friends were using. I had a friend who was teaching it. I wasn't really aware of other methods at the time. And so it was just the choice that was available to us and made sense for us. In hindsight, I can share later on why I still continue to choose that, why I continue to teach it, and why I like it the best out of all of the options.
Yeah.
But it was amazing. So we took classes together when we were engaged. Then we got married. We used Creighton, which is a type of NFP, to intentionally avoid pregnancy for a period of time. And then we decided that it was a good time to try to get pregnant. And so we started using Creighton then to try to achieve pregnancy. And it has been such a gift to us because we went through a season of infertility and weren't able to get pregnant. And through charting my cycle, working with a medical professional who was also trained in Creighton, she was able to help me figure out what was going on with my health and help us ultimately become pregnant. So it was because of Creighton and what I learned through that we were able to achieve pregnancy ultimately. And so in the midst of all of that, in 2019, I knew from the time I learned about it, I knew I couldn't wait to practice it and couldn't wait to learn it myself. And then as soon as I got married and started using it, I was like, oh, I would love to teach this to other people because I can't shut up about it. Like, I want to tell everybody about it. It comes up in my conversations all the time. If somebody starts talking about their cycle, like, I will talk about it for the rest of my life. So I
Me
really
too.
felt...
Me too. No, I'm just kidding.
So I really felt called to teach it, but it's an education program through a university. It's not like something that you just casually take a class on to begin teaching.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really in the cards at the time, but we prayed about it, and God made it very clear that he wanted me to go down this path to get trained to teach others, because the opportunity presented itself and a scholarship presented itself really out of the blue. And I was invited to go like the next month to training. And I was like, okay, perfect. Sounds great. So I started training in 2019. I'm still in the final stages. I've completed the education program. I'm in my final internship, but I've been working with clients since then. And it's just a huge gift to me and everyone that I know that uses it. And yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's so beautiful. I can't help but think being someone who like works in sharing the faith and being passionate about evangelization, and that, of course, and we can talk again more about this later. We keep saying that, but we will. That NFP is not just for Catholics or just for Christians, right? It's
Totally.
there's morally good things and it benefits to it, right? As Christians, but putting the morality part of it aside, like there's a lot of health benefits, of course, too. But
Absolutely.
what was I going to say about that? I think I don't even remember now that I'm thinking about it, but I think what I was going to say, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add and affirm what you just said, that it's true. Like, we can talk about why it's right morally from a religious standpoint, but I could talk all day about why NFP is the right choice without talking about religion whatsoever. It is about that because God created us, but it's not about that because it's just about who we are and how we are as humans.
Yes, thank you. You're hitting the nail on the head. What I wanted to say is that like it's such a gift, I think, to the church too, in a particular way, in that it's a tool of evangelization, I think, in our time. And obviously in God's divine providence, he provided, and I wish I had a better understanding of this, but I remember watching a documentary on it about how when the pill was being developed, I think in the 50s and 60s, when it was being worked on, at the same time, quietly, I think the first method that was developed was the Billings ovulation method, I believe. And it was like done quietly around the same time, but very few knew about it. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is like, it's almost providential. It is, right? It's God's providence that it was provided and gifted to us as, I think, a way to help serve families in this time, but also I think as a way to draw people back to himself, because I mean, even amongst Catholics, it's no secret that it's in the 90 percentile of Catholics who use contraception, you know, estimated.
Yes.
And that's scary to think about when we know the church teaches directly against the use of contraceptives. So I know that I love how passionate you are about like saying like you want to share it with anybody, talk about anybody, and I know that like you're just doing it from the goodness of your heart of wanting people to know like the like treasure that you found, right? But at the end of the day too, it's also, I think, a way that is going to draw people back to the Lord and back to living according to his ways, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's both. It goes hand in hand because it's who we are as humans, and that's because God created us that way. And so it's all connected. Yeah. And just to add to what you were just saying, so Creighton was developed from the Billings method. So the Billings method existed first. And prior to that, originally, like the OG NFP method was the calendar rhythm method, which is why at this point, NFP gets a bad rep, because the calendar rhythm method is 100% inaccurate. It's not reliable. It doesn't work, which is why like my grandparents, that generation, would think that we're all crazy for trying to practice NFP because they're still thinking the original. But thank God science and research has progressed since then. And after the birth control pill, so this is like Creighton origin specifically, after the birth control pill was developed in the 60s, everyone was looking to the Catholic Church saying like, what is your official stance on this? What is the church's official stance on this? And Pope Paul VI was Pope at the time, and he wrote Humanae Vitae. And in this encyclical, he was talking about the church's stance against contraception, and also calling, though, like, to the goodness of the human person and sexuality, and calling doctors and medical professionals to figure out how to make a reliable method that works for couples, that it's not responsible for them to get pregnant at that moment, but that doesn't go against God's design for the human person. And so Dr. Hilders, who's the founder of Creighton, heard that and said, like, okay, so I'm going to listen to the Pope and do the research and develop this method that is science-based and research-based. And it is in accordance to our faith, and it's in accordance to the way that God created us. So anyway, just to go off of what you were just saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you for kind of painting that picture a little bit for me and for our listeners. What I wanted to ask you next, if you could just real quickly in a brief way, could you kind of make a distinction for our listeners, like what's the difference between the rhythm method and NFP in a general sense, just so that's clear, because I get that question too from even my own family.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So the rhythm method is looking at a 28-day cycle and saying that a woman has her period on the first day of a 28-day cycle and she ovulates on day 14. That is it. We're grateful for the calendar rhythm method because all other methods were derived from it, and that was the original basis that we had. But it is the vast minority of women that have a 28-day cycle. Having a 28-day cycle, a lot of people think that they have irregular cycles because they don't have 28-day cycles. That's not the norm. Okay. That's not the most usual thing. And so ovulation cannot be predicted. There's so many things that go into it. I have people tell me every single day. I was talking to somebody in therapy today, one of my clients, who was telling me, oh, I have this app and it tells me when I'm ovulating. And I was like, please don't go based on that because it's not accurate. No app can predict when you're ovulating. That's the calendar rhythm method. It's predicting based on the length of your cycles when you're ovulating. And it's just not reliable because there is such a variable amount of time between when a woman gets her period and when she ovulates. That's dependent on so many factors. It can't be predicted ahead of time. So these other methods that have developed with research and science since then is looking at these specific biomarkers like the temperature, like the cervical mucus, and looking at the day-to-day changes and looking at what that tells us about the woman's fertility. So for example, there's changes in the temperature based on the time of ovulation. And I don't teach that method, so I don't know all the details, but when a woman learns that, when a couple learns that, then they can make determinations about whether or not she's fertile based on the temperature, and the same with cervical mucus.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just thinking when you're saying that, I know I'm a little bit familiar with, I think it's the Marquette method. My wife and I used it post pregnancy after our second child, and it was where we used and sorry for lack of knowing the terms, I think it's called a fertility monitor. Is that what it's called? It's like
was it testing the
clear blue? It's like with strips.
Okay.
And it's like testing a hormone. And I was just thinking, like, someday I'm sure, like, it's not on the phone right now because you can't really input any sort of hormonal levels. But I think that, of course, there's probably apps that you can record that stuff. But somehow integrating the technology where you can, like, somehow, I don't know, maybe I'm going too far here, but like being able to use, rather than having a monitor, it just being part of your smartphone. So maybe there will be that day where there will be an app that can do it accurately, not with the rhythm method, but with a somehow. Right.
Yeah. There are some apps for some of the methods. It's just that if an app ever is just telling you, like, predicting when you're ovulating,
that makes sense.
Run away.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah. That makes ton of sense. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and just move to, for a little bit, talking about like the morality part of it. So for Catholic listeners or Christian listeners, why would we use NFP? So let's first distinguish what is the difference now. We can now define contraception and how it's different from NFP. And we'll just start there, and then maybe we can talk about how because I think there's a whole nother segment where I know amongst Catholics there's even kind of this talk that, NFP is just Catholic birth control, right? We're just like putting a little stamp on it. So maybe we'll talk about that second. But first, what's the difference between contraception and NFP?
Yeah, so contraception interferes with the marital act. And when I say marital act, I mean intercourse between a married couple. So contraception interferes with that. It interferes with the way that God designed us and designed our human sexuality. It tries to separate the bonding element from the baby's element. It's basically saying, like, using contraception says, I love you, but I don't want all of you. I don't want your fertility. I only want some of you. And NFP is different because in no way whatsoever does it interfere with the marital act or human sexuality. It allows for a complete active intercourse between husband and wife. It can't be a method of contraception because it can also be used to achieve pregnancy. So contraception is in no way ever trying to achieve pregnancy. NFP can also equally be used to achieve pregnancy. It can also equally be used to just monitor fertility. So because of those various ways that it can be used, it can't be contraception. Even when it's being used to avoid pregnancy, it's still not Catholic birth control. Some people can have a sort of contraceptive mindset with it.
Sure.
And I know we're going to talk about more of like what valid reasons are to use NFP to avoid pregnancy. So I'll hold off on that. But it's not birth control because it is simply allowing a couple to be informed about their body and giving them awareness about when they're fertile and infertile, and so that they can make educated and informed decisions about when to have intercourse according to their intentions. And it wouldn't make sense for there to be anything wrong with that, because right now we're choosing not to have intercourse at the moment. Nobody here is having intercourse. So it can't be wrong to choose when to have intercourse. If we're informed about what's going on with our body, that also can't be wrong. We have information about the way that God designed our body. So all of that is good to know about that and to use it wisely and responsibly.
Yeah, it's super clear that in and of itself, it's a good. And I think for myself, it's most simply seen as you're just saying no, you're sacrificing and refraining from doing anything rather than saying, you know what, I want to do this, and because we're not ready to get pregnant, I'm going to do, whatever it takes to be able to do this. And I think that's a totally different mindset. This I'm going to be very sensitive with this, but I heard someone else say this. I'm not totally sure. I think it was Jason Everett. I'm not totally positive, and he's, a big chastity speaker. And I heard something like the comparison between the difference between NFP and contraception is like kind of comparing exercising and dieting with like, I don't know if this is the right term, but like almost like a bulimic sort of practice of eating. And the point I think he was trying to make was, one is sort of the food, the end of the food is to nourish you. And we don't eat and get the sort of enjoyment, the pleasure out of it, and say forgo the end of it, which is the actual nourishment. And if we do that, we call that in our society an eating disorder, right? Whereas when it comes to intercourse, if we know we're not supposed to reach we're not prepared to reach that end of pregnancy, which is children, well, then we shouldn't be going about using it as merely a means of pleasure and trying to sort of separate the pleasure from that end. And if it is, we could arguably call it a sexual disorder, right? And ordinarily, I think we would just say it's just using each other, right? It's kind of using using intercourse as a for lack of a better term, just use a means of pleasure, right? Using each other as objects. So anyways, I don't know. I think that's helpful for me. I don't know if that would be helpful for anybody else, but just seeing how it's not natural. It's not natural to use contraception, but to use and practice NFP, it's a totally natural thing. There's nothing being thrown into the mix between you and your spouse. It's actually instead you and your spouse loving each other by refraining, which is so contrary to, I think, how our culture presents sex today. So, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. And it also yes, there are times of discipline and refraining from intercourse if a couple is trying to avoid pregnancy using NFP. And the other part of that is that it allows for a couple to completely 100% with no reservation and no holding nothing back to give themselves to one another when they do choose to engage in intercourse, whether it's on a fertile day or infertile day. There's nothing being held back. There's no barriers. There's no lack of fertility. There's no anything that's getting in the way. There's no withdrawal. There's nothing that's getting in the way from a complete act of a self-gift, which is so beautiful, and how intercourse should be enjoyed by a married couple.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. So how about for Catholics who are considering using NFP and they're concerned about the moral aspect of it? So the church, and I believe it first and foremost was in Humanae Vitae from Pope Paul VI, mentioned that this is a morally acceptable means of spacing births and
Yes.
delaying pregnancy, or of course trying to achieve pregnancy. But there are certain things that make that morally acceptable, right? It's not just, as you mentioned, like some Catholic couples or even just Christian couples in general may use this in a contraceptive sort of mindset. So what do you mean by that? And then also, what then is a morally acceptable reason to practice NFP, particularly, I guess, for delaying pregnancy?
Sure. Yeah. So the church tells us that we need to have moral means. So in order to avoid pregnancy intentionally, so we need to have moral means, which is NFP. Any method of NFP without any additions, because sometimes people try to use an NFP method and then they'll also try to use condoms, or we're not talking about that.
Okay.
Straight up NFP methods that are completely natural. Those are moral means. And then in addition to having a moral means, there also needs to be a just reason. So the decision for a couple to choose to avoid pregnancy is a private decision. It should be made through prayer and discernment with God. But that's never something that should be judged or anything from anyone outside of the relationship, because it's going to be different for everyone. It's going to look different for everyone. So a few examples of what those just reasons could be. A few would be, and these are definitely just to name a few, not all inclusive, but some physical reasons. So a few different categories of like what we can look at that would be just reasons to avoid pregnancy using NFP. Physical reasons, there's economic reasons, there's psychological reasons, there's social reasons. So physical reasons could be that a couple just had a new baby and they're adjusting to having a new baby at home. And at the end of the day, it's about responsible parenthood. So is it responsible of us to intentionally try to achieve a new pregnancy right now after we just gave birth? For some couples, the answer is yes, that it is responsible of us and we want to try to achieve pregnancy right away. And for some couples who are maybe going through postpartum depression or just the adjustment period of having a new baby, that might not be the most responsible thing for them. And so that would be a just reason. Other physical reasons could be specific medical conditions, medications that it would be unsafe to become pregnant on. Economic reasons could be unemployment or serious financial hardship. Psychological reasons could be relationship problems that are significant, emotional distress, mental illness, things like that. Social reasons could be war, famine, unrest. It could be a pandemic like we're going through. But the point is that what's responsible for one might be irresponsible for another, and what's irresponsible for one might be responsible for another. So we can't look at another couple and make a judgment that they should be trying to achieve pregnancy right now, and I know that they're not, because that's something that the couple needs to discern prayerfully with God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good message to be said, because I think we're all in our fallen nature are quick to judge when we see, oh, this couple's been married, this young Catholic couple's been married for a few years, why are they not having kids? We don't know. We don't know the reasons. It could be infertility. It could be that there's a discernment there that for some reason that they're not ready and it's not the responsible decision. So I think that's very, very helpful. What would you say, even though again, it needs to be discerned within the couple, what would you say are some examples of unjust reasons that maybe people use as, I know that might be kind of hard, but just, I don't know if you're able to. It would be
hard to define specifically, but I would say anything that's on the superficial side, or saying like, for example, an easy one to define would be saying, I'm going to use NFP in my marriage to avoid pregnancy because I don't want children. That would not be, if we're living by the way that God wants us to, who wants us to be fruitful and be open to life. That would not be an appropriate way to use NFP indefinitely to avoid children just because I don't want children.
Sure.
And then other things could be like, I don't want to have kids for 10 years because I want to travel. That's not like, I don't want to define too many things because again, it's a couple, but when it's more superficial reasons and less like it's irresponsible of me to get pregnant right now because I can't pay my bills. And if I have a child, I'm not going to be able to afford to feed them. That's very like irresponsible of them to intentionally do that. But other things might not be so irresponsible if it's depending on the reason for them.
Sure. I like that criteria though, like superficial. If it's something that's superficial, that's automatically unjust. I think even though we can't judge people from the inside, but for each of us who are discerning constantly, maybe as someone either about to get married or who are married, I think that term responsible parenthood, like that, I noticed that that's actually in the Catechism, like that's defined. It's probably in Humanae Vitae. It's a specific term the church uses and recognizes that like we are called to be responsible in our parenthood. We're not just called to, like, I know that of course it says be fruitful and multiply. And I think Pope Francis, he, got, of course, caught by the media by saying, I think a few years back, that we as human beings are not meant to like propagate like rabbits. I think he made some sort of statement like that. And of course, the media ran with it and made him look bad amongst Catholics who, see themselves as very conservative, and then on the other side of it too, right? So, but of course, it makes sense when you understand it in the responsible parenthood framework, but he's just sharing church teaching that, we're not meant to just do whatever we want and just like not think about the consequences of those actions, but we need to consider what type of life we are providing for our children and stuff like that. But there's also that slippery slope. I'm sure people who are listening or watching are thinking too, well, hang on. What if you stretch that responsible parenthood thing too far and sort of trick yourself into thinking like our society does, and saying, and kind of an example of this would be where we have a lot of young people waiting until they're well into their career and they're 37 years old and they're just now considering getting married when they've been dating for 10 years. You know what I mean? Like where we have that sort of like kind of continue to put things off because they're thinking, well, I'm trying to be responsible. I'm trying to be successful and be prepared well for marriage. And that's kind of just, not really understanding what marriage is about. It's about building a life together with someone. And so anyways, the point I'm trying to make is I think there's that balance. There's that happy medium of discernment, of truly trying to discern God's will and be responsible, but also not be selfish and be superficial about it too. So some maybe guiding principles to help us in our discernment. Because I know from someone who's married, I think that it's hard. It's not an easy, discernment in general is hard in any state of life. And I think couples, I was surprised when I got married and then we were shocked by how easily we were able to have children. And we were like, whoa, okay, if we don't actually try to abstain at times, like intentionally, we're going to have a child every single year, which for some people may be okay. But for us, and particularly having a relationship with my wife, knew that this is hard on both her body and her mind. We can't just be, again, irresponsible about this. So yeah, I think just maybe encouragement to anyone that's listening, like know that it's hard. It's not easy. It's partly kind of a participation in the cross of Christ, but also that he's in that discernment with us, and it's possible. So, okay, let's move into maybe some myth busting with NFP. And I'm sure you hear all of these all the time because
all the time,
right?
Love it.
I know, right? Everyone misunderstands NFP. And so there are some specifics that we want to hit on. So I'm going to ask you what your response would be if someone says the following. Okay. So let's go with the first one. What would your response be to someone who says that NFP is not as reliable as contraceptive methods for preventing pregnancy?
I would say, let's look at the research. So looking at, again, NFP is an umbrella term. So I want to say it was last year, I want to say it was 2019, that the CDC finally updated their website. I don't know what they updated. They updated their description of how reliable NFP is. Because for a long time, it said that it was 2% reliable, which is because NFP is an umbrella term. So if it includes the calendar rhythm method, which is not reliable, it probably is 2% reliable, then we have to say NFP is 2% reliable. But that's not indicative of what NFP truly is with all these different methods, and every single different method has different efficacy rates. So we have to look at the research on each individual method. So again, I can only really speak to Creighton because that's what I know, that's what I practice, that's what I teach.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look at that, Creighton specifically, the method effectiveness for avoiding pregnancy in couples of normal fertility, so they have no infertility, no subfertility, no fertility issues whatsoever, for avoiding pregnancy, method effectiveness is 99.5% effective. And then the use effectiveness, so taking into consideration maybe a woman forgot to chart one day, maybe she forgot to make some observations, imperfect use, is still 96.8% effective. So still highly effective, even including user error.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is telling us that this method, a method of NFP, is just as reliable as any oral contraceptive on the market, and much better for us because, number one, moral reasons. Number two, there's no side effects. There's no risk to our health whatsoever. It's completely natural. Not to mention all the positive benefits, but there's no negative side effects whatsoever. So the other thing with contraception is also an umbrella term. So we have to kind of define what we're talking about there. I was comparing it to oral contraceptives because the effectiveness rates of those tend to be relatively high, like I was mentioning with Creighton. But if we look at condoms, I just want to mention this because learning about this blew my mind in like understanding what it means for a condom to be effective. Mm-hmm. So most days of a woman's cycle, I don't know if everybody knows this, so I'll explain this as well. Most days of a woman's cycle, she's infertile. So there's only a certain period of time in a woman's cycle, and it's the minority amount of days that she is actually fertile and can become pregnant. So keeping that in consideration, a condom, the rate of effectiveness that is recorded is based on random acts of intercourse over the course of a year and how many people got pregnant. But the majority of the year, the woman is infertile anyway and wouldn't be able to get pregnant anyway. So if we only tested condoms on the days of fertility, the success rates of those condoms would be much lower than it actually shows.
Interesting.
So just to share that because I think that's important and people don't realize what that actually means. I didn't either.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It makes total sense too. Like you were saying, contraception's an umbrella term. So I think, there's like, when you were saying how effective, particularly the Creighton model is, like, I think that even, I believe, I don't know the numbers, I'm not going to pretend to, that even I think oral contraceptives is significantly still lower over a course of certain amount of time. And then it probably makes so much sense that it would drop significantly in the use of a condom during the fertile period. So it's crazy how many people are out there using these forms of contraception, particularly those that may not be chemical, so they're not having any sort of internal effect. I guess I don't know if that's only a condom, but in using them without any knowledge of how the body works when it comes to conception, it's crazy. It's crazy. So okay, well, cool. So I'm sure there's so much more we could say about contraception and how NFP is actually more reliable, but let's go on to the second myth that we can bust. So the second one is, what would your response be to someone who says that NFP is too complicated for the average person? Too much science?
I would say that we have to have a lot more faith in people because people are capable of a lot. And if we're not giving them credit for being able to learn how their body works, I think that's an issue. I think we need to have more faith in people. It's human biology. We should be taught this in elementary school. Maybe not exactly how to use NFP, but just the functions of our body, because what I teach in an intro session, I have never had a single intro session where somebody is not saying, why did I not learn that my body works this way? And so people are capable of learning. It takes time and energy and effort and discipline to use NFP, but people are capable. It does take all those things. So somebody has to be willing to invest themselves in the process of learning. And that's why a lot of methods have a teacher assigned or a practitioner assigned to help you be successful, because it's learning a new language. It's difficult in the beginning because you've never done it before. It's like learning anything, but having somebody to coach you through it and help you succeed, people can totally do it. We have to have like no faith in people to think that they're not capable of learning something new. It's not, it's not the most difficult thing in the world. Even with I have no science background. Science classes were my least favorite thing. I struggled through any science class that I had to take in college, and it's not a problem to learn the way that your body works.
Yeah.
So.
And you know, when my wife and I were taking our classes in our marriage prep for NFP, we were learning the Billings ovulation method, and our instructor was sharing with us in one of our one-on-one meetings. I believe, I might misspeak here, but I believe she was sharing how Mother Teresa, I think, started to, I don't know if she had her missionaries of charity learn the Billings method or some method to be able to begin to teach those who are in poverty these methods, because in these third world countries, people are getting pregnant, and they're in certain situations that you could say maybe, you know, not trying to speak lowly of them, but it could be an irresponsible situation because they're in poverty and it's difficult, and, you know, just different problems. But anyways, the point is these people need effective means to be able to either delay or achieve pregnancy too. And she was able to teach this to people who were probably not very educated, right? So clearly it's not that complex or not that complicated. And I think I can speak to, there is science, like you're saying, behind it, right? There's definitely a lot of study and data that goes into that, right? It's not, I don't want to like make it sound like it's not well researched, right? But from going to the classes myself, I even remember, I think it was one like 3-hour course to actually learn the method, and then it was just the checkups with the instructor of actually the practicing and implementing the method. So it's clearly not that complex. It's possible, and it's a better approach than what we're doing in our middle schools when it comes to sex education, which is just, hey, you're gonna give in at some point, so here's some means of contraception, right? So you're right. We need to have more faith in humanity. I think we need to have more faith in young people, that young people can live and practice virtue and self-restraint instead of just assuming people are going to indulge in their desires. So okay. So it's not too complicated for the average person. Let's go to number 3. What would your response be to someone who says that NFP can only be used by women with regular cycles? I think we already sort of touched on this earlier, but I don't know if you wanted to speak to that again or say something new.
Yeah, that's 1,000% false. So a woman does not need to have a regular cycle. Just to define that really quick, because I that's what I mentioned earlier, that a regular cycle does not mean that you're 28 days. A regular cycle means that the cycle length from period to period is between 21 to 38 days. So that amount of variety is still within a normal consideration. A woman would have her period, then she would have a number of days, she would have her fertile window, then about 2 weeks later, she'll have her next period. So 21 to 38 days would be a regular cycle, and that's kind of the different events that would happen. The thing with NFP is that we're not guessing. So we're making daily observations about what's going on within the woman's body. So it doesn't matter how regular or irregular the cycle is, because it's just, what are you seeing today? And today, based on that information and based on that information in context, then we make a decision. So any circumstance, any woman can use NFP from the time she gets her first period in middle school or whenever that happens for her until she hits menopause. During any circumstance, she can chart with NFP, including during pregnancy, when a woman's breastfeeding, postpartum, if she's not ovulating, if she has irregular cycles, anything. I'm not charting during pregnancy, but I know a lot of women who do, because it still gives you information. Although you're not cycling the same way that you normally would, charting and making observations about what your body's doing every day still gives you a lot of information about your health. So at all times throughout a woman's life, again, from the time she gets her first period until she hits menopause, no matter what her cycle looks like. I have a client who hasn't had a period in 5 years, and she's charting. So it doesn't matter what your cycle looks like, and it definitely does not have to be regular.
And like you're saying, like by charting, you can discover why maybe your cycle something is off with it, and you can go to a doctor to discover maybe why. I actually had a friend who, her and her husband were having a hard time conceiving, and I think she noticed something was kind of different, or something was up with her cycle, and she went and talked to a doctor, and she ended up discovering that, and again, I might be misspeaking here, but I think it was progesterone. I think is that the hormone? I think she had like low levels of progesterone than normal, and which they were telling her was making it harder for her to conceive, and if she were to conceive, that there was a much higher risk for miscarriage. And so she began to take some medication to be able, or hormones to be able to increase her levels of progesterone, and she has conceived 2 children now since doing that, and she would have never known that if she was not charting her cycle. So shows you again that the gift that these methods have for women and for marriages. So great, awesome. Okay, so let's go to number 4. We just have 2 more. So number 4 is, what is your response to someone who says that NFP is going to hurt my relationship with my spouse?
I would again say, let's just look at what the research shows and what the research tells us. So I looked up a couple of different studies to see exactly what is said. So one study said, in one study, the reports was 80 to 85% of the people said that NFP was helpful to their marriage. Another research study showed that most NFP users are satisfied with their use of NFP. Most find the periodic abstinence not to be a problem, which is another hesitation that people have with it, that that's going to be too problematic. So most people find that not to be a problem, and that most people also find that NFP actually enhances their sex drive, which therefore is beneficial to the marriage. Another study showed that the percentage of Catholic women, so this was a study of Catholic women who of reproductive age indicated using NFP, their chance of divorce was almost 50% less than Catholic women who had never used NFP. So there is a decrease in the divorce rate of those who use NFP. And then just to add what we do with Creighton specifically, what my husband and I use, what I teach to my clients, is that this is a method for the couple to use. This is not something that the woman is doing on her own. This is something the couple is doing together. And we emphasize intimacy of the whole person. So intimacy between spouses is not just intercourse. And it's really important that couples are developing all these other areas of intimacy and sexual connection, such as emotional intimacy and spiritual intimacy and physical intimacy that is not only focused on genital contact and intercourse, intellectual connection, communication, how is their dialogue, how are they doing respecting one another. So we open all of these conversations in the midst of teaching NFP because it's all related and all very important. So I would say that it does the opposite of hurting the relationship with the spouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a man, as a gentleman, I can sort of speak, I think, to that fact of, like, we have to be a part of that, part of the process of practicing NFP, because again, I think it can in practice sometimes end up being put on the wife, on the woman, because she's the one charting her cycle. But I think it's important for us as men to recognize, and that's the beauty of it, in that there's the communication of, this is where I am in my cycle, this is our discernment of our family at this time. And so we're either going to be intimate or we're not going to be intimate. And I think I will be the first to admit, my wife will reiterate it, that it is hard to abstain at a lot of the time, right? It's during the time that you are most, your sex drive is the highest, that you typically have to abstain, because your body is preparing to make a child. So therefore your drive is a little bit higher. So you can't go into this just totally like without any self-control. And that's hard, and that's the cross in it, but it's also the beauty in it, because it's actually helping you to become a better person. It's helping you to become a more self-mastered person. And I remember coming across a friend of mine, she was coming out of her marriage prep with her fiance, and it was at the church, and we were walking by, my wife and I at the time, and they were sharing with us that they were doing the training for NFP, and the fiance, the man, was a little bit hesitant. He was a convert to the faith, and he was a little bit hesitant to practice NFP. And I remember just their the kind of attitude about it was a little bit like, kind of, we're just doing it because the pastor is making us do this as part of marriage prep, and we're not totally sure if it's for us. And we were just chatting about it, and I stopped and I said, you know what, if I can just share as a man, like to you, the future husband, but also to your future wife, like, I was like, you have to do it, because not just because it's the church's teachings, like, yeah, of course, that should be one of the reasons, but you have to do it because it's going to help you to love each other authentically, because you're going to actually have to say no to this act, and it's going to force you to not objectify each other, to not use each other, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt when you want to do this, but it's just not the right thing for your spouse. And you may think that that's you not being able to like express love to your spouse, but instead you're actually being invited to a greater expression of love to your spouse. And that's a sacrificial love, right? And I think it was Mother Teresa as well that said that real love hurts, right? It's easy to be physically intimate. It's not a hard thing to do. What's hard is to say no to that. So anyways, I'm sure we have a lot of male listeners. So like, just know that like, it's not easy. It's hard. You're a part of the process, but also that it is a gift. Even if in your fallen human nature, you don't want to say no, know that it's a gift to make you a virtuous man and a truly a man, not a boy, right? I think that's a gift in it for us men. So it will not hurt your relationship with your spouse. I think it can, and maybe you want to speak to this, but I think it can if you don't communicate, right? It can if it becomes this whole thing that it's the woman's burden. And I think, again, that's where for the man, we have a responsibility. And because I think if we sort of just create it like, oh, hey, babe, you know, what's today? Is it a go day or no day? You know, like that's not appropriate, because it's not about that. It's not about what are you getting out of this. It's about what are you giving to your spouse in love, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go to the last myth that we have here. And that one is, what is your response to someone who says NFP is only for Catholics? And again, we kind of spoke on this a little bit as well, but let's speak directly to it. Is NFP only for Catholics?
I would ask them if only Catholics deserve to know about their bodies and to know about their fertility and to know about their reproductive health and to improve their marriage. And of course, the answer to that is no. Everyone deserves this information. This is simply information, education about the human body and the human person, sexuality, and everyone deserves that information, not just Catholics. It happens to be what the Catholic Church supports because it makes sense and it's aligned with everything that we believe as Catholics. So it's a beautiful, very good option for Catholics, but it's also a beautiful, very good option for every single person that lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. Simple, to the point. So we've talked about 5 different myths. Melissa, are there any other significant myths maybe you would want to mention or debunk for our listeners?
I think those are the main myths. I do have a whole video on my YouTube channel, so I will give you the link so that you can share that with people. That what I asked on Instagram one time last year, what people's assumptions about NFP was, and answered all of those myths, talking about whether they were true or untrue. And so we go into a lot more. So I can share that, and then you can share that. But I think that you covered the main ones that come up most often. Okay,
cool. And yeah, for our listeners, absolutely look in the description. It should be there. Check out that video. Okay, well, let's move then into some of the methods. I know you've been talking a lot about the Creighton, and that's what you particularly are trained in. I think I've mentioned at this point, my wife and I have practiced the Billings method as well as the Marquette method to an extent. For those who are listening who are wanting to get trained, not as a teacher or someone that will train others, but just for themselves and their own marriage, but let's say they've been married, so they're not going through marriage prep or anything, they don't have that natural access to training, where can someone go to be trained in a particular method of NFP? Where should they start?
Yeah, so I would say, number one, a good resource for kind of looking at all of the methods. I always share this resource because I think it can be a little bit overwhelming to realize that there's so many methods and how do I know which one's right for me. There's a website that's a really good resource called managingyourfertility.com. And basically they will just do an overview of all the different methods, how it works, what it looks at, how the training system is. And so then you can decide which one you want to use. So that's a good place to start to determine which method you want to use. And then once you know the method that you want to use, you can look on that method's main website hub, and there should be a way to find practitioners or teachers of that method. So for example, for Creighton, maybe you can share about Billings, how you came across your instructor. For Creighton, our website is FertilityCare.org. And so if you go to that website, the first thing you see on the homepage is a place to search for fertility care centers by city or by area. And so you just type in your zip code or your city name, and then you'll see all the centers that are closest to you. If there's not anyone closest to you, a lot of practitioners work virtually, so you can just pick one and call them and ask if they do virtual work. Cool. And then I would imagine it would be similar to Billings. Did you go on a website to find your teacher?
To be honest, because it was through our marriage prep, our pastor had an in-house instructor. Yeah, one of our parishioners. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
So I would imagine Billings would be similar, though, that they have like a main website that has a list of their teachers that people could find.
Yeah, and I've said this before, but yeah, any links, anything that we're talking about, I'm going to be sure we'll put lots of links in the description for our listeners, because I think there's so many resources out there, but people aren't aware of them. So we'll be sure, if I'll find for Billings and share the one that you mentioned, you can send that one to me, the general one, and we'll get that in there. Great. I think my next question for you is probably already answered. I was going to ask you what method you would recommend. Would you probably say Creighton, or for someone who's just starting out?
I always recommend Creighton because I love it, and it's worked really well for us and for all of our friends and everyone that I know and all my clients. I'll share specifically why I like Creighton now, knowing a lot more. So like at the time that I chose Creighton, like I said, I didn't have any frame of reference. All I knew was Creighton, so I went with Creighton. At this point, I would always still choose Creighton, and I recommend Creighton to people that are asking me for suggestions. And there's two main reasons for that. One is that Creighton is cervical mucus based. So it's only based on one biomarker. So we don't have to worry about, I just don't want to do the extra work to check multiple biomarkers. And cervical mucus alone is as reliable as I mentioned earlier. So it's very reliable just to be checking that. So I prefer only checking the one biomarker. Temperature, I probably could do because I don't have any like crazy things happening in my life. But for example, temperature is very variable. If, let's say, like a woman works a night shift as a nurse, or if she has a nursing baby and she's up all night, or things like that, it has to be very specific, taken at the same time every day. So temperature is a bit more sensitive. So I appreciate only checking cervical mucus. The other reason that's even more important to me is that Creighton is the only method, to my knowledge, that has a medical component. So there's the component of myself being a practitioner, just like any old person who goes to get trained and does the education program, that could have any background. But then there's also medical professionals, doctors, PAs, things like that, who are trained as NAPRO medical consultants. And NAPRO is the medical application. So that means that anyone who is charting with Creighton, trying to achieve pregnancy, not able to, or we're charting the cycle and it looks all kinds of funky and there's all kinds of things going on and there's cycle issues that need to be addressed, we'll send them to a NAPRO medical consultant who is trained in Creighton and will be able to look at those Creighton charts and do certain tests to figure out what's going on with the woman's body and her cycle and her health, and then actually treat her for the issues that she's experiencing. So that's like a huge, huge benefit. A lot of times, like if someone's going through infertility, I especially recommend Creighton because of that, just because I know how effective it is in helping couples conceive when they've been going through infertility.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. I do have a question for you. I hear it all the time, but I'm curious what it stands for. What does NAPRO stand for? Is that like an abbreviation or? Yeah,
it stands for Natural Procreative Technology.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
NAPRO technology, natural procreative technology.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, for some reason I've never come across that. I've heard NAPRO many times though. I also want to, and you can tell me what your thought is. I don't know what your experience is with it, but as I mentioned earlier, after my wife had our second, we ended up using, and she discovered it from a friend of ours, the Clear Blue what is it called? Fertility monitor, which tests the hormones. And I think you basically are testing your urine and for different hormonal levels. And the reason why we did that was because we noticed that when she was breastfeeding and just after after giving birth, her cervical mucus was just very, very difficult to observe. And so she discovered using a fertility monitor is a little bit more, I don't know if this is the right term, but objective, at least in the sense of like, it's more clear, I guess you should say, in that like, hey, this is your hormonal level or it's not, and helps you to then chart a little bit more accurately. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's I'm sure it's just as accurate. Maybe it's just a little bit simpler. I don't know. Do you have any experience with the fertility monitors or any thought on it?
Not really.
No.
I know that I have heard that people tend to like Marquette for postpartum use, especially when they're breastfeeding before they have their cycles back.
Okay.
So I know that is some benefit to that. I do know that before you have your cycle back or postpartum, either way, you could have like very different looking mucus.
Things
or
change.
A lot
the body
more
changes.
Mucus. Yeah. Right. The body's going through a lot at that time. So there's a learning curve, and it would be extremely difficult to do that well without working closely with a practitioner.
Sure.
Even just me as a newlywed learning Creighton and using it for the first time, I was so confused. I was texting my practitioner all the time, like, what is happening? What do I do? What does this mean?
Yeah.
So I think that that's really important to have somebody that you're working with. I know some NFP methods, you can just take a class online and you're not working with an actual person. And I would just find that so difficult to learn this whole thing and figure out your body on your own. So yeah, that's kind of what I know about that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think if anything, I want our listeners or our viewers to just be aware that there's many methods out there, and it's clearly the woman's body constantly changes, especially after pregnancy and birth. Like the woman's body changes, and so you don't have to be married to one method your whole life. You can adjust or change as needed for your body. So that's a beautiful thing to be aware of. But there are many methods out there to investigate.
Yeah.
Okay. So another thought. This is something that I've always wondered. I think I know the answer, but I'm curious what your thought is. Is you were mentioning earlier about how we need to have more faith in people and be able to teach this to people and know that, it's not hard to learn. Why do you think methods of NFP are not taught in medical schools? Like, why is it that when my wife and I go to a doctor after she's given birth, our first appointment, every single time our doctor asks us that question, what is your plan for contraception? What is your plan? What are you guys going to do? And we always say, we practice, a form of natural family planning. Two different doctors have both come back and said, okay, well, let me know if that doesn't work for you. And it's just very clear and obvious that they don't know what it is. Yeah. So why do you think methods of NFP aren't taught in medical schools?
My opinion is that it comes down to where the money is. Yeah. And the contraceptive market in the United States is a multi-billion-dollar industry. They have a lot of money. They fund medical schools. They fund students to go to medical school. They fund scholarships, and they are dictating what is taught because of that. There's no money in the natural world. There's no money in natural methods. Yeah. And so it's not like they don't have the same opportunity to do the same thing that this multi-billion-dollar industry is doing. So there is science behind NFP. There is research. There are medical texts that, like, especially I'm thinking of Creighton again, because that's what I'm familiar with, but there is like a NAPRO technology medical textbook that can be purchased by medical students who are interested in learning. I know my doctor purchased it online, read it through because she is very interested. She's becoming a NAPRO medical consultant at the moment, but she read through it all herself online or with the textbook and things like that. So there is all this research and science, but there's just not the money and funding to put it into medical schools. I would love that. I think it's very important. I don't blame medical professionals for not knowing about it, but I do think it's important that we are educated enough to respond to doctors when they tell you. I've had plenty of doctors before I found Creighton doctors that are like, you're crazy, NFP doesn't work. there's no research behind it. And I'm like, thank you so much for your opinion. I gotta go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important that we know, but that's why I think that it's not taught in medical schools.
Mm-hmm. Which is why I think we need more people young people today who want to become doctors. It's like, man, we got to somehow, and I'm glad you're talking about it as much as you can. Like, because if people were to hear about this, I think that they would, if they're not going to hear it at medical school, maybe they'll go do it and study it on their own. But
yeah,
somehow it would be a gift if this could be in sort of a widespread kind of environment.
It would. And we just need more people learning about it and educating themselves so that they can then educate others. And it is like, it's a grassroots movement kind of thing. Because there's no money in it.
It's growing. You're noticing on the internet, it's not just amongst Christians anymore, right? Where it kind of was only Catholics for a while, it seemed. But now you're seeing,
I think I said earlier, or maybe I said it to you before we started, that like for me, my work with NFP has taken on a life of its own that I didn't anticipate or plan, because truly, if I open my mouth and like breathe NFP, everyone wants to learn because it's
hungry.
It makes sense. It's the way that our body works. People want to know how their body works. People want to get off of these like hormones that are totally messing up their body and the way that it works. And so every time I talk about it, somebody wants to learn because it just makes sense. It aligns with our body and it's good. And people like it when they learn about it. So, and I get messages from people really often on Instagram who are in like nursing school or PA school or medical school. And they'll send me like pictures of the slides that they're learning in class. And they're like, but this is what my teacher's saying. And I know it's not true, but I don't know what to say. And so it's really important that we learn this stuff so that we do know what to say in response.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was going to ask you next was, my wife and I being in that situation a couple times now, we've had discussions with each other, with her sister, who also has a couple children and experienced this too, that after giving birth, like again, the first thing it seems like the doctor wants to do is get you either back on or onto contraception. Well, I don't, you may not have firsthand experience with that situation quite yet, but maybe you've had this in another situation with a doctor. You can maybe give some advice or counsel to maybe someone. What would be your way of going about responding to a doctor who is kind of trying to push contraceptives on you for whatever, who knows the reason why, but what's a good way to respond in that face-to-face situation where they're saying, what's your plan? Because it's hard. It's not easy you can't explain NFP in 5 minutes, right?
Right. And I think it is hard because we should trust our doctors and we want to trust our doctors. So if a doctor is telling you you need birth control or you should be on birth control, like the instinct is to believe them and listen to them. But then you also know that that's not necessarily true. Hopefully now, if you didn't know before.
Sorry to interrupt you, but is there ever a reason, like medical reason, to be on birth control, like the pill?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because people, that's a big, I thought that should have been one of our myths, right? Because that's something that people believe.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I would ask, first of all, making sure I know exactly why they're prescribing birth control, why they think I need to be on birth control, why they're recommending it, like what's going on, what is the health condition that you think that I need birth control for? And then if somebody tells me, okay, I have this health condition and my doctor told me I need to be on birth control to manage it, I would then go and tell them why exactly they don't need to be on birth control for that specific condition and explain that. So like, for example, if somebody has a lot of teenagers, I have all kinds of teenagers that tell me this every single day, that they have painful periods, that they have really heavy periods, that they have something going on with their cycle that is abnormal, or they are throwing up every time they have their period, or they can't go to school. They have to stay home and they have to stay in bed, or they have migraines, like all these crazy things that are not normal. So a doctor is most likely going to prescribe birth control for that, because what it does is manage the symptoms. It takes away the symptoms. But when someone is experiencing cycle issues and abnormalities, there's a reason for that. So covering up the symptoms does not solve the physical health issues that are going on. There is nothing that goes on in the body that birth control will fix. And if you're giving me a pill for something going wrong in my body, then the goal should be to heal my body and fix whatever is not working properly.
Mm-hmm.
But birth control doesn't do that. When we're talking about oral contraceptives, it's a Band-Aid. It masks the symptoms, but it doesn't alleviate the actual root of the issue. So it would be comparable to like if I have an infection, and because I have an infection, I get a fever, and I take aspirin to alleviate my fever, and my fever goes away. I still have an infection that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
So my symptom went away, but my symptom was telling me that my body had a problem, and that problem needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happens with birth control. There's no medical condition that it actually treats. There are treatment options. So like birth control is pushed first. And so I would say to a doctor in reply, I am not taking birth control. That's not an option for me. What other treatment options do you have for me in this medical condition that I have?
I like that.
And they may have suggestions or they may not. And if they don't, and they tell you birth control is your only option, then I would say find a new doctor. Sometimes they will have suggestions, and sometimes they'll say, this is the only option that I have for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that you can do. That's what everybody does. Everybody's on birth control. And it's true. Everybody is. Not everybody, but
a lot of people
are on birth control because their doctors tell them to be. And it's not necessary. And it's concerning to me. I have a client, a therapy client who is on birth control and has been told for many, many, many years that she needs to be on birth control because her periods are 3 weeks long. I'm concerned hearing that because your period should never be 3 weeks long. So she's taking birth control and now her periods seem normal, but whatever issue was causing her periods to be 3 weeks long still exists in her body and is not being treated or dealt with, which is very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
On top of all of that, birth control is listed by the FDA as a carcinogen, which is something known to be linked with cancer. For example, cigarettes are a carcinogen, also oral contraceptives. So we know that it's bad for the human body and we should not be on it for any reason.
Yeah.
And that is what I think about that.
You know how when you walk into a restaurant now, because all the laws that have been passed, at least here in California, I don't know if it's nationwide, but here in California, pretty much every restaurant now, you walk in, there's a sign that says the food served here causes cancer because something in the food. I know it's really bad. Don't come to California. If you come, don't eat. No, I'm just kidding. But like a lot of the times it'll say something of that sense, like some material used in this building or some, substance in the, we just have a lot of those signs that I've noticed here in California. And it's because particular laws have been passed to like inform the consumer. Okay. And I think typically it's in reference to a lot of the plastics that are used like in the building and in the food and service industry. Anyways, the point I'm making is like, I don't know because I don't take oral contraceptives or have access to them, right? For multiple reasons. And one of them being that I'm a man. But either way, the point is are there those signs telling people that, hey, this is a carcinogen, this could potentially cause cancer? Yeah,
so some packaging does have that listed.
Yeah.
Nobody reads the packaging, I don't think.
Like always, probably.
So yes, it is listed on the packaging if you read it thoroughly.
In size like 3-point font.
But
probably.
I remember, I so clearly remember this conversation that I had when I was 17 years old with a doctor. I was on birth control. I was intentionally at that time taking it to deal with acne that I had that was hormonal. And at the time, wasn't practicing my faith, couldn't have cared less what the church said. So that was not in my mind at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the doctor, asked for birth control, but also was like, just had like this inner sense that it can't be right to take something that changes the function of my body indefinitely. Like that can't be good for you. And I asked him, I said like, okay, so I want to go on this because I have acne and I want it to go away. And I hear that this will help it go away. Are there any side effects? Are there any risks to my health long-term? Like, should I go off of it at some point? And his response was, there are no side effects. There are no risks to your health. My daughters are on it. They've been on it for years. You'll be fine to take it as long as you want, which is not true. Like none of that is true.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I don't blame doctors. Like, they don't have bad intentions. I don't believe, I love doctors. Like, I don't think they have bad intentions. It's what we talked about earlier, that they're not taught. And what they are taught is that NFP doesn't work. So they're not educated about it. So I try to have patience, but also to just, I know what I know. And so when doctors tell me something that I know is not true, I know that I've been educated differently. And I know that they are educated in things that I don't know about that's very important and I need them. But also they don't know about NFP. So if they tell me it doesn't work, I will tell them that they're wrong maybe, or I will just say, like, thank you for your opinion, and I will go on my way. Like, you don't need to listen to everything that your doctor says. You don't need to be bullied by them. If they tell you you need birth control, you don't have to just say yes and take it if you know differently.
And I've often heard that it's said that when you take oral contraceptives, it tricks the woman's body into thinking that it's pregnant. Is that true?
So I'll talk about the two mechanisms of what, yes, that is true in a way, of like what the hormones are doing. The two things that the birth control pill is doing, and I'm glad that you asked that because I think it's important, and I don't think a lot of people know what's actually happening. I never did. So the birth control pill's main goal is to shut down the function of women's reproductive system. So women in their reproductive system, every cycle will ovulate, and that's a normally healthy function of the body. The birth control pill is number one primary goal is going to try to shut down that function and not allow her to ovulate at all. So think about, like, you're taking a pill for a certain reason, whether to try to avoid pregnancy or to try to fix some other issue that you're having. And the goal of the pill is to shut down a functioning part of your body. That should be a number one red flag. But number two, sometimes it doesn't work that way. And sometimes the body is fighting so hard to override that because it's not normal. And it wants to ovulate because that's normal. And so if the body succeeds in overriding the pill shutting down that function and she does ovulate, then the pill's secondary mechanism is to make sure that any newly conceived life will die. So if conception does occur, then the pill will then work to make sure that the uterus is a very hostile environment that won't sustain life, and it will cause a very early abortion. She may not even know that has happened because it's so early, but that's the secondary cause, or the secondary mechanism of how it works. And sometimes it does happen where, like, sometimes people will start charting with Creighton while they're still taking the pill, just to kind of get in the hang of it before they feel comfortable going off of the pill. And what some women find is that their cycle looks pretty normal. It looks as if they're not on the pill. And so that's telling us that it's not doing its primary function. It's not shutting down ovulation, but it's working in that secondary way that I mentioned. So I think it's really important that we know exactly what it's doing if we're putting this into our body.
Yeah. And I think that, again, as we mentioned earlier, the vast majority of Catholic women are using some sort of form of contraceptives, and probably the one that's used the most is oral contraceptives. And I would say most Catholics that are informed about their faith understand the gravity of abortion at all stages of pregnancy, but are unaware, as you just said, that the oral contraceptives can actually cause an very early term abortion. And so I think if people were more aware of that, they'd recognize you can't just be against abortion, and not against contraceptives. You have to recognize that they kind of go hand in hand, at least in this particular way. Yeah. So there's so much more that could be said about this, but out of respect for your time, Melissa, I'd be okay with wrapping up here in just a bit. Maybe we can kind of close here by providing some last few words of encouragement, maybe to both, if you don't mind, to both women who are considering getting off the pill and practicing NFP. They're going through kind of what you were sharing about your own story. I think that's where a lot of people, particularly women, are at. What sort of encouragement would you give to women in that situation? And then maybe what words of encouragement would you give to men who may be struggling to understand why their spouse is wanting to make this change in their life?
Yeah, I would say for women, it will be one of the best decisions that you ever make in your life, for yourself, for your health, for your marriage, for your kids, for your future marriage. for your future self, for every reason, it is such a good decision because you deserve true health care. You don't deserve birth control that just covers up your symptoms and doesn't treat you as a human being that's individual and unique and having some health problems maybe. You deserve someone to look at you and say, what is going on? Let's get to the root of what your health issues are and treat you so that you get back to complete health instead of just covering up whatever you're experiencing and ignoring it. So I think that it's one of the best decisions that a woman can make for herself. For a man, I would say I would encourage you to talk with other men who use it in their marriage and watch videos about it. Just get educated about what it looks like, because I think in the beginning, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of ideas about what this is going to mean for our relationship, for our sex life, for all these things. So talk to people who are actually using it, find out their experiences, watch videos, actually learn about what it is, and attend the classes together. I find that there is more resistance. Usually it is the woman dragging the man to come to the class, and there's much more resistance on the men's side. But when he's there, almost 100% of the time that I've given an intro session to a couple, the woman's like, yeah, awesome, cool. Like she was already on board. And the man sitting there like, what? Like, I didn't know this. What's like, and asking so many questions and so engaged and so involved and are so open and receptive to it once they're there, because it's education about how their body works as a man and how their wife's body works and how their fertility works. And it's interesting. And I think that like I find men to be very open and receptive once they get in the door. And a lot of times guys will tell me like, oh, like I came here kicking and screaming. I didn't want to come. Like we were fighting the whole way here. But then they're like, but I'm so glad I'm so glad they made me come. And I'm so glad that I'm here because like men care about the health and well-being of their wives and they love them, and they don't want, like men don't want something harmful to be going into their wife's body who they love. They don't want to be shutting down a healthy functioning part of her body, and men want to do what's loving and protective of their wives. And this is that. So I think just like the openness to conversations and education is what I would say and encourage for both men and women.
Awesome. That's great. And one last word for men. Like, I think that experience you were describing of, kicking and screaming when you get there, but then you start to learn about the woman's body. And I think it's truly like this like moment of awe of like, wow, the woman's body. Like you always hear people joking about people saying how the women are complex, right? You hear people say that jokingly. And like you learn like, no, truly women are like complex, like in their bodies. There's a reason why like men, we don't understand them, right? Our bodies are just for some reason much more simple. And you realize that like, wow, it just creates such a reverence, I think, from being a man for your wife's body, where that learning about it and not just being told, hey, this is what we're doing now and you have to abstain at these times, but understanding the way the body, both the man and the woman's body work in congruent with the woman, it creates this reverence where it makes it easier to be willing to sacrifice, because you're like, wow, I never want to just use and treat my wife like an object or like some piece of meat, but rather, no, she is clearly created by God, and that is shown forth by the complexity and beauty of her body. So anyways, thank you for those words of encouragement. I think those are great and very well said. So before we wrap up though, where can those of our listeners or viewers, if they want to discover more of your content, where can they learn more about you and also just your story and all these different, I know you said something about your video on NFP on YouTube, but yeah, where are these things that they can find you?
Yes. So I am most active on Instagram, and my Instagram is Melissa Grace Tablada, which is my full name, and basically Melissa Grace Tablada everywhere. So on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook. Where else? Those are the main places. Yeah, sure. Most active on Instagram, YouTube, in theory, but there's a lot of videos up from the past, and hopefully will be more in the future.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. And honestly, this was like such a enjoyable, great conversation. I feel like I learned a lot, and now I'm like re-inspired to go out and start talking about NFP. And it's just probably kind of funny coming from a man, but thank you for sitting down with me. I don't know how many men you talk about this with, like this in this environment, but it's been a gift for myself. So
it's super important. Like, we need men like you to talk about it and normalize it. And it's funny, who were we talking to? I don't know. I was with my husband and some other people the other day, and we were talking about, I think like one of the women was talking about her period, and they kind of like apologized to my husband, like, oh, sorry that we're talking about a period. And then he was like, do you know what we talk about at home all the time? Like, I'm married to an NFP practitioner. We talk about cervical mucus. We talk about periods. We talk about all kinds of stuff. And I think that all those things should be normalized and because they're normal. And anyway, like, it's really helpful when men are talking about it, because then other men and other people realize how normal it is and how good it is to have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you again for taking your time to sit down and talk with me about these things. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast. I really hope you learned a lot about natural family planning. And if you want to learn more, as you know, there were some resources mentioned during the show, and I provided those links below in the description so you can look more into natural family planning. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, more episodes like this, and you just enjoy learning about what the Catholic Church actually teaches about our faith, please hit that subscribe button so you can know the next time a video comes out. Also, hit that like button and share the link to this video on your social media pages. Spread the word about natural family planning. Like, it is time to get this beauty and truth out to the world. So many people are living lives enslaved to contraception. And so we need to share the beauty of natural family planning with the world. And hopefully you can use this video as a starting discussion point with those friends and family of whom you love and whom you want to share natural family planning with. So anyways, I look forward to the next video, the next episode that we'll have coming out. But as always, until then, God bless.